Hugh is on a much-deserved vacation. Now that the Republic is in safe hands for the next few years, he felt a lot better about taking some time off, and good for him to do so. He's been putting in a grind over the last, 4 or 5 months, and it was a very welcomed time for him to take a little bit of personal leave. So he will rejoin us next week. Mark Davis will be filling in on Wednesday. Ed Morrissey will be filling in on Thursday. I will be back with you on Friday, and tomorrow is where the furniture gets broken. Our friend Colonel Schlichter, will be coming in to do his thing tomorrow. So that'll be a lot of fun. Get his take on the nominees and all sorts of things. But let's get you caught up to speed on what happened over the weekend. By the way, if you want to know who I am the longtime producer of the Hugh Hewitt Show. In fact, the only senior producer of the Hugh Hewitt Show for these almost 25 years. I have my own podcast now as well, Dwayne's World, which you can learn about at dwayne.world, Duane.world. Of course, all things Hugh is over at hughhewitt.com, which is where you should start and finish your day, at hughhewitt.com. His YouTube channel, his columns, his highly concentrated Hugh podcast, all of that can be found and linked at hughhewitt.com. So, over the weekend, the big question is, did the media learn their lesson? Have the Democrats begun the soul-searching necessary to work their way out of the wilderness in which they are about ready to travel? The shorter answer is, I don't think so yet. And we've got lots of examples ahead to play for you to kind of give you a sense of how the copium is going amongst our friends on the left. But some news since we last spoke, end of last week. Lots of appointments made by the president, and a bunch of other ones, if the rumor mill is true, should serve to be pretty spectacular. But the ones that he did make over the last few days is for Energy Secretary, a gentleman named Chris Wright, who is one of the forerunners on the fracking movement. And if you don't know who Chris Wright is, maybe the best way to introduce him is to read you a little bit out of the Wall Street Journal, because they've got kind of an interesting way to lead into it. They start out by, or actually, let's start by playing a little Chris Wright himself. When Chris Wright was speaking to the Edmund Burke Foundation in August of this year, so this is just a few months ago, here is what Chris's take is on energy and what we need to do to increase production, which would further resurrect the economy and get jobs going and all that the economic boom that Donald Trump has promised. Here's what Chris Wright had to say. Cut number 18.
So energy matters. It matters for human lives. It matters for human well-being. It matters for low-income people and social mobility, low-income people to come up. When you hear crazy stuff today, check it out, dig a little deeper. Hurricanes are not growing. That's in the IPCC report. Tornadoes are actually on the decline. Floods, droughts, all of these things you hear ceaselessly, they just simply aren't so. It isn't even controversial that they're not so. But media, politicians just continually abuse these facts. And I'll end with one last fact, because anxiety is growing among kids. I'm sure everyone has seen that. 20% of kids go to bed at night worried about climate change. Your chance of dying from extreme weather today is greater than 95, has been reduced by more than 97% over the last century. There's just an absolute plummeting from 500,000 people a year dying from extreme weather to less than 10,000 the last couple of years, while the world population has quadrupled. So facts matter, human liberty matters, bottom-up social organization has always been the way to a better world. Let's resist this force of top-down control that's not benefiting humans except those in government.
Reading from the Wall Street Journal yesterday, a story by Benoit Morin and Colin Eaton on the front page. This is not the conservative editorial side of the Wall Street Journal. This is the fairly left of center main page part of the journal. Wright was front and center for the fracking revolution that reshaped the country as a band of scrappy wildcatters that reinvigorated U.S. oil and gas production to record heights. Talks about his $2.8 billion company, Liberty Energy, and then goes on to say Wright's selection elevates a pugnacious branch of the oil and gas industry that is skeptical of climate change science and mostly hasn't pledged to build out low-carbon energy businesses, unlike the giants ExxonMobil and Chevron. So they don't like him much over at the Wall Street Journal's main news page, which is actually probably a pretty good sign to me. He's going to work hand in glove with Interior Secretary nominee Doug Burgum, and they are going to treat oil and gas leases on federal land like they were a Pez dispenser. They're just going to be dishing them out, and that's actually a very good thing. As I wrote in Hot Air last week, if you actually take the state of Alaska and superimposed it upon the continental U.S., it's about 28% of the landmass of the continental U.S. Now, double that, maybe minus the Aleutian Islands on the second one. That's about half the country. That's how much federal land the government owns and is preventing from any development either in housing, energy, or anything else for that matter. It's just all private land. Now, I'm not saying put a bunch of condos in Yellowstone, but there's if you're talking half the country, there's a lot of just literally flyover or drive-through land that is not being used for anything and very well could be, and maybe sitting on mountains and piles of all sorts of rare earth minerals, oil, and gas that we can develop to the benefit of the economy. So that's, I think, a very, very good thing. The other pick from over the weekend is Brendan Carr as the new FCC chairman, Federal Communications Commission chairman. He is the senior Republican on the 5-person panel, and the Washington Post is not pleased. And if the Washington Post is not pleased with Brendan Carr as FCC pick, I'm probably really, really happy with this. Let me read you just the first couple of graphs so you can kind of get the pith of the gist. This is by Ava Dow and Cristiano Lima Strong in the story yesterday. President-elect Donald Trump said Sunday he was naming Brendan Carr as the next Federal Communications Commission chairman, positioning the regulatory agency to do battle against social media companies and TV broadcasters that Republicans portray as too liberal. Carr, 45, the senior Republican among the FCC's 5 commissioners, has vowed in recent days to take on what he called a censorship cartel, including Facebook, Google, Apple, and Microsoft. Well, you had me at all 4 of those. Earlier this year, he laid out an aggressive agenda for the FCC in Project 2025, a conservative proposal for Trump's second term developed by the Heritage Foundation. Carr has been a vocal supporter of billionaire Elon Musk and an advocate of tougher restrictions on China. Oh, please stop. Don't write any more. I'm already sold. You don't have to give me any more reason than that. Sounds like a phenomenal choice to me. Look, has the media done their thing and said, okay, we've lost viewers, we're hemorrhaging cash as far as our operating budget and revenue. Things aren't working out very well. Maybe, just perhaps, we've gone a little bit too far to the left. Well, I don't think they've really reached that point yet. Now, Chris Wallace served his last day at CNN on Friday. He's the veteran newsman was released from his contract before he had a chance to quit and go pursue podcasting on his own. He will now continue to do that. We'll see if he can make a go of it in the podcast world. But there is lots of issues with mainstream media not really coming to grips. Like on CNN with Scott Pelley. You can just hear the setup to his piece on the election and the nominees thus far. We'll cover that coming up after the break. And then I've got examples of real problems the left has with some of Donald Trump's nominees. Some of their points which are valid, by the way. But the messengers they choose to make those points, you're looking at that going, now, wait a minute, who won again over the last couple weeks? And who are you inviting onto these Sunday shows again? It doesn't make any sense. By and large, the bulk of the Trump cabinet taking shape, it's coming across as a very strong, with a couple exceptions we'll discuss through the show. But there's even rumors that Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford is going to be tapped very imminently as the National Institute of Health director. And that would be a spectacular choice. Oh, well, I'd be thrilled with that after what happened with the pandemic and how the alphabet agencies attacked him in response to just asking the obvious questions about where's the science in all this policy stuff. There wasn't any. And he kept looking at it from a medical perspective and saying, we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. There's no science behind this. And he got blackballed and canceled by the elites and the bureaucrats in the alphabet healthcare agencies. Well, now apparently he's going to run one of them. That's just going to be grand. Now, here's what else is going on. Just quick market report as long as we are working our way into the show this morning. And, of course, the market update is brought to us by our friends at American Federal. AmericanFederal.com, 800-221-7694. That's 800-221-7694. Nick Rovich and his team are there to give you some advice on what to do now that the market is kind of booming and pausing a little bit, then booming some more. Gold kind of retreated a little bit from its high a few weeks ago of 28.01. It's down to 25.95 in pre-market trading, but it's up about $26 from yesterday. So it looks like gold may be making another surge going up again. Maybe this is a right buy point for you. Maybe it's not. Who knows? But if you don't know enough about the gold market, you know you should probably have some of your portfolio hedged in gold. But when's the right buy point? Call Nick. He'll know. 800-221-7694. That's 800-221-7694 or AmericanFederal.com. Now, let's get back to the media. Because of all the entities out there, ABC was horrible, NBC was not so great, CNN was not so great, although they had their moments where it was kind of fun. But the worst of the worst had to be CBS News, right? They were the worst of the worst as far as not just sticking their thumb on the scale, but putting their entire body mass on it, right, in favor of the Democrats. Well, last night on 60 Minutes, Scott Pelley, who, unlike President-elect Donald Trump, who actually can learn new tricks, Scott Pelley is an old dog who proves the adage that he can't learn any new tricks. Here was his open to the segment in question regarding Donald Trump's nominees. Let's play cut 11 with Scott Pelley in this piece. Well, number one, if all you did was get your news from Scott Pelley and CBS News, you might think that that's the entire sum total of the amount of nominees that Donald Trump has appointed thus far. And he's appointed about 25 of them. And about 20 of them are not even remotely controversial. Now, the left is going to try to make hay of every single one of them because, one, Donald Trump mine, Vic Mattis. You can catch him at Victorino Mattis online on Twitter X. But he, along with Mary Catherine Ham, have one of the finest podcasts, besides my own, at Getting Hammered. And he joins us now. And I just have to tell the audience, Vic, that week in and week out, when I get you set up for your weekly visits with Hugh, I kept asking you whether or not you had joined Team Optimism yet. And I never did get you fully on board with Team Optimism. Team Optimism feels pretty good now, doesn't it?
It does. If I go back to even when things were, pretty good, Dwayne, right before the election, and you were asking me, am I my wife and I, we were just in New York City over the weekend, and there's a huge crowd outside of Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue. No protesters, though. They were all people who were ogling tourists, people taking pictures. And then, of course, later on Saturday night, there was a big UFC fight at Madison Square
Yep.
Garden. And Trump, of course, and his crew, his potential cabinet, were all there. And you had people, wandering around. There was a father and son on our train going back who went to the UFC fight. They had the shirts, and they were saying there are people out there with MAGA hats in Manhattan. And that's something that I think was unthinkable, not too long ago. And I think it's just because, as you've spoken about and Hugh has spoken about, Trump has won. More support than he's made gains from coast to coast, including in New York.
I was talking about this with my wife last night. The one thing that Trump has done, and again, you can like him or hate him, I don't care. It's a different argument. The one thing that Donald Trump has done is he's made Republicans cool again. All the NFL players are doing the Trump dance in the end zone now, right? I mean, you saw the I don't remember the name of the guy, the UFC fighter that won Saturday night, but he had this wicked round kick to the gut and knocked the guy out, and when he gets his belt, he starts doing the Trump dance. It's pretty remarkable the impact that Donald Trump has had on the culture.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's doing it. They're doing it at the NFL level, at the college football level, and various other sports. It's quite remarkable, and that is the thing that people are talking about is that people were a lot more timid or even intimidated into not expressing support for Trump, certainly in 2016, but also obviously in 2020. And you're seeing less of that, and that's also in the face of being told that this would be potentially the last election. They're going to round up, the journalists and the historians, apparently, according to Michael Beschloss. And then, in addition to that, fascism, the end of democracy. And of course, just every other possible celebrity coming up on stage with Kamala Harris to say, hey, we're doing it. Shouldn't you too? And the other side, Trump's side, was like, wait a minute, no, we're not just going to just nod there and say, yeah, you're right, but rather come out. And so you had actors. I think Zachary Levi was one that surprised me because, he says, they're out there in Hollywood, and it's now or never. If you want to, make your opinion known, you don't have to. But at the same time, you just don't have to sit there anymore.
Justine Bateman has come out recently. The Family Ties
Yes.
teen star. She's come out and is kind of red pilled, which is kind of fun to see. Now you were talking about New York.
She has a wonderful, she has a wonderful cameo, by the way, Dwayne, in Arrested Development.
Yes,
and just if you have to look her up in that, she's really great.
Absolutely. As long as we're talking about New York and what happened over the weekend, you being up there, we got to talk about the governor, because I was making this case that I don't think the left has quite gotten it yet. They still have a long way to go in the wilderness before they kind of have their soul searching moment and figure out what they've got to do to win again. Kathy Hochul held a press conference over the weekend, or last Friday, and she's talking about this tax, this fee, this congestion fee in New York City that she's going to impose. The original plan was to impose a $15 a day fee to use the Empire State's highways and byways. But upon further review, she's going to drop it to $9, thus saving the taxpayers of New York thousands of dollars a year, potentially. A 40% savings. Let's play cut number 13.
During this process. From day one, I have made affordability for New York families a top priority. I always have, and I always will, fight to put more money in the pockets of everyday New Yorkers. That's why back in June, I stood up on behalf of hardworking families and simply said no. No to a new $15 congestion toll that at that particular time was just too much. Too many people were worrying about high costs, groceries, rent, childcare. These are real challenges for our families. And launching a toll that high really would have hurt a working mom or working dad trying to make ends meet, especially someone driving in from a transportation desert or far from outside the center of the city. As governor, it is my job to make decisions that take into account the needs of all working New Yorkers. So I made the decision to put the congestion pricing program on pause while we devise a different path forward. State law requires that congestion pricing simultaneously raise money for the MTA and drive down traffic congestion. These are important priorities. But I believe that no New Yorker should have to pay a penny more than absolutely necessary to achieve these goals. And $15 was too much. And I'm proud to announce we have found a path to fund the MTA, reduce congestion, and keep millions of dollars in the pockets of our commuters. Under this plan, the MTA will implement a congestion pricing plan with a reduced daytime toll of $9 beginning in January. You heard that correctly. It was $15 before, and now it is $9. That is a 40% reduction.
Okay, stop right there. Vic Mattis, do you know what the current pricing is for the congestion fee today?
Yeah, I'm gonna guess it's about $9 less than that. Is that right?
It's $0 right now. See, do you remember Gallagher, the watermelon smashing comedian back in the 80s and 90s, did the Showtime specials? He did a running gag on this about women saving you money buying stuff because it was on sale. I've seen this bit before, right? I mean, what is this nonsense?
Yeah, I mean, they might as well have proposed $100 congestion fee, and then she could say, "I've got great news for you. I'm going to only charge you 50." And then it'll be like, "Oh, that's wonderful." No, it's as perceptive as she's always been. When you think about Governor Hochul in the white dress next to the grill, I mean, she's really connecting with the voters here. It's a problem with, they're losing the city of New York and the state. They're losing people. People are leaving that state. We know this. You and I know this. We talk about this. They're going to places like Florida and Texas and other places south. This is not a way to keep and retain those people who have decided they still want to have to either, work somewhere within the city, or they're commuting from Connecticut or New Jersey. It's not great. And something tells me there's going to be a lot of pushback for this, as there should be. And again, you think about New York in the last election, it was not a blowout relative to prior elections for a Democrat over a Republican. I mean, she barely herself survived a race against Lee Zeldin. So somebody's going to have to tell her this is a bad idea, or she's going to have to, like many Democrats, just learn the hard way.
It was just incredible. So last question. Where do you come down on the overall nature of the Trump picks? Look, if he's nominated 25 thus far, which is about the number that he's come up with, conservatives are going to find 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 of them they really don't like a lot. That's going to be pretty typical. But of the 25, are you in the camp that we're better off than we thought it would be, or about what we thought it would be, or worse off than what you thought?
Well, in terms of numbers, we have a lot of, I think the Trump administration has a lot of great picks. I just heard Brendan Carr, for example, for, FCC chair, and he's already there. So I think that's a great pick. And obviously, I think Marco Rubio is a great pick. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. You
mean that extremist, that Scott Pelley complained about on 60 Minutes?
Yeah, no, they still can't hold back. They still don't get it. Fine, they continue to get. If they continue not to get it, then it's a bonus for Republicans. Yeah, you're going to have some bad picks, but as my colleague Matt Continetti mentioned in his Friday column in the Free Beacon, every administration, incoming Obama and Bush and prior administrations, you're going to have picks that don't go over well. And a number of those picks don't even make it to confirmation. So it's not a surprise. Everybody's talking, obviously, about Matt Gaetz as AG. That might not even make it. But you throw it all in there, and in the grand scheme of things, I think there's more good than bad. Definitely.
We reject all three categories of these ballots.
Your motion is to reject or dismiss the challenges in this category in front of you?
Correct, yep.
Not going to second that, mostly because I think we all know that precedent by a court doesn't matter anymore in this country, and people violate laws anytime they want. So for me, if I violate this law, it's because I want a court to pay attention to it.
That's Diane Ellis Marseglia, one of the 3 Bucks County, Pennsylvania Board of Supervisors, in absolutely lawless action. Laws, schmlaws. We don't care. It doesn't matter what the state Supreme Court has said. We're just going to count whoever we want to count, regardless of whether it helps the election or not. It's a remarkable state of affairs in Bucks County. Dwayne Patterson in for Hugh Hewitt. The race, of course, has been called for Dave McCormick, and I'm joined by my good friend Yinzer Selena Zito of the Washington Examiner and the New York Post. You can read all of her stuff at selenazito.com. Hello, Selena. How are you?
Good morning, sunshine. How are you?
I am grand. So I see everybody that matters except Bob Casey Jr. has conceded the race, right? Is Casey still holding on to the fever dream?
Yeah, I can't quite figure out what he's doing. Even with the amount of ballots left, even after the illegal counting of these voters that were unregistered, the math isn't there. He still won't win. And so I wonder if he's making this decision to just let the process play out, which is basically what he's saying, is so that the Bucks County commissioners and their actions, which again, I need to reinforce, were illegal, set precedents, and that this can be a precedent to be used in the future, because this is not something that would ever pass legislatively. So that's my guess. There's no way that he wins. There's no way.
No,
the math is not
there's no way that he. Yeah, there's no way that he wins. And Chris LaCivita tweeted a little bit earlier. Stephen Law, who is one of the vote watchers, was saying they're actually metastasizing this into a RICO scheme. Is what Bucks County is doing. And Chris LaCivita said, "Don't worry, they are going to go to jail because of this once the new administration comes in." I don't think the new Justice Department is going to put up with this and take too kindly to what their actions were. But before we completely run out of time, I want to talk about your piece on Friday, which was a masterpiece on Friday. This is Biden was the fluke in 2020, not Donald Trump in 2016. I want you to kind of flesh that out for people that didn't get a chance to read it.
So, when Trump was elected in 2016, a lot of experts and reporters and Democrats and even some Republicans said this is a fluke, right? This is an outlier. It's never going to happen again.
An aberration, yeah.
Right. And 2020 happened, and for them, that solidified their belief. And I even said a week after the election of 2020, I'm like, I think this is a fluke. I think this is a result of COVID and all that the country has been through. Donald Trump is very, very, very good at fighting something. It's very, 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 very difficult to fight a pandemic because it doesn't punch back, right? And so, I believed that, Biden winning. Now, I didn't know who was going to win in 2024. Trump went down in the polls. In fact, I wrote in February of 23, his movement back was East Palestine and showing up, right? That was really, really important. And it worked. But yeah, the country is center right. And it's been moving that way, or it actually never went away from being center right and 2020 was just a fluke. We are not left. What Biden promised was center left. What he delivered was left, and the country wholeheartedly rejected that we are a left or even a center left country.
Just a few seconds left. Chris Wright has been named to be the energy secretary, along with Doug Burgum as interior. Uh, Fracking is back. Energy production is going to be back. So, what do you think people in Western PA think of these two picks? Are they thrilled, or do they know anything about these people?
Oh yeah, Wright and Burgum are well known in the region, both for energy. Bergman will be great in interior. His support for the Teddy Roosevelt National Park
Yep.
in North Dakota was just outstanding, and Wright is well known in the energy sector in the area.
Very good news on that front. I'm glad Pennsylvania is going to get rewarded with their vote with a bunch of energy production. Follow Selena at Zito Selena on Twitter X or at selenazito.com. I am in today and Friday. The irascible Colonel Kurt Schlichter will be in tomorrow in this very chair. Mark Davis, out of our affiliate in Dallas, AM 660 The Answer, will be joining us. And then Ed Morrissey of Hot Air will be sitting in the big chair on Thursday. And we look forward to that. I am joined by another good friend of the program. This would be Akash Chogali of the Americans for Prosperity, the vice president there. You can catch Akash online on Twitter X at Akash, AKASHJC. And Akash, once again, congratulations on the just outstanding work you guys put in voter turnout through the americansforprosperity.org/volunteer effort. It certainly paid dividends. But I'm going to ask you the question that no guest wants to hear, but we really do need to focus on it. And that is, what have you done for me lately? We've got to worry about 2026 now because the left is already working on 2026, Akash. What's AFP's plans for the next cycle?
Yeah, Dwayne, AFP will be back on the doors, back on doorsteps, on phones for the 2026 cycle. But here's the thing about AFP. We are not just a political election-oriented organization. We're around 365 days a year, 12 months out of the year, which means the best thing we can do for 2026 is score important policy victories in 2025. And AFP will be more active than any other group, doing exactly that, working with Congress, working with the administration, pushing that message in the grassroots to swing voters, helping advance good policy, get it across the finish line, tell folks who did the right thing, who did the wrong thing when it came to actually casting votes. We've been working closely with the Speaker's office, the Majority Leader, and others as far as that big tax reconciliation package. We're working on immigration reforms, energy reforms, what have you. And so the best thing we can do for 2026 right now is what we have planned for 2025, and that is to score important policy victories that we're going to be proud to be a part of.
Absolutely correct. Again, you go to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer to learn more. Akash, since we last spoke, we've had appointments to the interior of North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. We've had Chris Wright now nominated to be the Secretary of Energy. You couldn't be happier at AFP over those two picks, could you?
Nope, those are both phenomenal picks. Chris Wright, folks may not know his name. He's a very, very successful energy entrepreneur. He really is the definition of what we like to say is an all-of-the-above energy person, right? Not only is he not about playing favorites for green energy, he's also not about playing favorites for traditional energy or any kind of energy. He's a free market champion. He's from the West. He knows the importance of protecting the environment, but of course knows the importance of protecting access to affordable, reliable, abundant energy without the subsidization of taxpayer dollars. Chris is a phenomenal pick. I'm looking forward to people learning more about him. Governor Burgum, of course, people learned about him on the campaign trail. Another successful entrepreneur, understands the importance of energy. And like Chris, he's able to go out and make this case. I thought he was a fantastic surrogate on media throughout this year. And again, this is an issue that conservatives never get a fair shake in the mainstream press on. And so just as important as his ability to do the job is his ability to go out and convince people of what the right path forward is. And again, I'm really looking forward to watching him succeed in this role.
I very much am as well. Let's shift to healthcare policy. Much attention is going to be paid to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and what his confirmation hearing is going to look like. He's, of course, a very controversial pick on both the left and the right for lots of different reasons. But the pick that I'm most interested in is one that has been elevated to high alert on the rumor mill. And that is allegedly the president-elect is about ready to nominate Jay Bhattacharya in as the NIH director. Now, if that turns out to be true, what would you make of that kind of a pick?
Yeah, again, a very, very interesting pick. He's somebody that I've followed for a long time. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant person, has been at the forefront of accountability for what government was doing 4 years ago with the pandemic. What was done right? What was done wrong? Where did they overstep? Where were decisions made kind of overzealously? Obviously, folks might remember under the Biden administration, the teachers union was involved in their recommending school shutdowns at the beginning of the pandemic, and Dr. Bhattacharya was at the forefront of exposing that. And so, again, this is why the role of the Senate is so important in these confirmation hearings, the advice and consent, as the Constitution has referred to it, of the Senate to question these nominees and ultimately be the ones to decide to vote to confirm them or not. I think Dr. Bhattacharya is very skilled, very intelligent, but a lot of the country, again, may not know all that much about him. And that is the role of their elected senators, is to ask the questions on important positions that folks might not have considered yet, important issues that might come up in that role, to see if he is really the right person for the job. And again, I'm looking forward to that process. Now, whether his position is not necessarily Senate confirmed, but I think a lot of that process with RFK and the direction of HHS and this administration will tell us a lot about that. And Dr. Bhattacharya would certainly be an interesting person at the head of the NIH, given the role it's played in our country over the last half decade.
Dwayne Patterson in for Hugh Hewitt. I'm joined by Akash Chogali of Americans for Prosperity, americansforprosperity.org/volunteers, where you learn a lot more, and you should. A couple of people that are not Senate confirmable picks are Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who are going to head up the newly minted Department of Government Efficiency. And I love these picks as well. Akash, I wanted to mention something that Vivek put up on Twitter/X a couple of days ago. And that is, they're not going to just cut the $4 million toilet projects and just reckless waste and spending all over government, which needs to be done, but that's not the extent of what they're going to do. They are going to implement and put into place the Supreme Court West Virginia versus EPA decision killing the Chevron doctrine. They're going to attack not just the federal agencies, but the pseudo Article 3 court system within those agencies to enforce their own rules. Akash, I don't think people understand how huge this is.
Yeah, no, this is a great point, Dwayne. I'm glad you brought this up. And so when people hear about DOGE, they might hear about recommendations to cut wasteful spending, or of course the administration has talked for a long time about getting rid of unnecessary regulations or reforming kind of federal workforce rules, these bureaucrats that are out of control. I think all that is important, but what you're talking about, Dwayne, is that in certain agencies, when you violate a regulation or break the law that agency is implementing, you would think most of the time it runs through kind of the traditional federal court system that upholds the law in this country, but that's actually not the case in many instances. I'll give you an example that folks, again, may or may not follow closely, but take the National Labor Relations Board. The National Labor Relations Board implements the National Labor Relations Act, of course, federal private sector labor law that governs the vast majority of workers in this country. If you're alleged to have broken the NLRA as an employer or even as a union, if you're a progressive and you care about the rights of unions, it doesn't run through the traditional courts. You don't have a traditional judge that adjudicates your case around the NLRA. There's what they call administrative law judges, ALJs, that sit inside the NLRB and through which that case runs. It's a completely kind of pseudo, legal system that runs to aside the traditional court system. There's really no basis for it in federal law, frankly, even though it's written into some of these statutes. from a conservative limited government constitutional standpoint, there's no reason that cases should be run through these sort of administrative law judges rather than through the traditional federal court system. And I think getting that back in place, or getting that into place, that breaking the law is run through the federal court system, not through ALJs, is as important as any of these other issues to reining in the administrative state, making it accountable to the American people and their elected representatives again.
Has AFP run any pieces or white papers on this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So our legal judicial attorneys at AFP Foundation have been at the forefront of all of these cases, West Virginia versus EPA and several others. They filed amicus briefs, written op-eds, and if you just search AFP Foundation, you'll see a lot of the important legal work that they're doing. A lot of it, again, behind the scenes that grassroots folks might not see necessarily, but getting these cases through the court is as important as any other branch of government to, again, reining in our government, reining in the administrative state, winning these cases in front of courts to get government back into its proper role is among the most important things we can do. And AFP Foundation has been proud to be at the forefront of doing that. And I think, we again saw that earlier this year with the Loper-Bright case. The attorneys from Cause of Action were at the forefront of that, striking down Chevron deference. So we've been involved in many of these efforts, and they're just as important as anything else that we're doing.
That's why we love Akash Chogli. That's why we love Americans for Prosperity. In the New York Times, there was this little fact-checking blurb about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Remember, he's the nominee for Health and Human Services for President-elect Trump. Mr. Kennedy has singled out Froot Loops as an example of a product with too many artificial ingredients, questioning why the Canadian version has fewer than the U.S. version. But he was wrong. The ingredient list is roughly the same, although Canada's has natural colorings made from blueberries and carrots, while the U.S. product contains red dye 40, yellow 5, and blue 1, as well as butylated hydroxytoluene, or BHT, a lab-made chemical that is used for freshness according to the ingredient label. In other words, he wasn't wrong, he was absolutely right. They cell-phoned themselves in their own fact check. Look, here's the thing. I used to be a connoisseur of processed cereals. Oh, Froot Loops, Lucky Charms. I even would do the Sugar Smacks. There was really not much in the way of a processed cereal that I wouldn't eat a box of in a sitting when I was younger. Can't do that anymore. That would not be good for the waistline, and it certainly isn't part of the myPhDweightloss.com diet. That's for blinking sure. Look, the My PhD weight loss scheme is one that works with your diet. It works with your schedule. It works with your tastes and things that aren't of your taste. You may have a sweet tooth when it comes to colas. Well, there actually is a cola out there that isn't a sugar-based cola and doesn't have all the carbs in it that you can substitute in. There's all sorts of things that you can eat that the counselors at myPhDweightloss.com will advise you of and help craft a plan that will allow you to lose the weight that you know you need to lose. I don't have to worry about the sugared cereals anymore because, well, I just don't have a need for them anymore. You should go to 864-644-1900. That's 864-644-1900. No shots, no pills, no $1,000 a month injections for the rest of your life. It's just nutrition. It's the way you should lose weight. It's safe. It's effective. And then they teach you how to keep it off, which is the most important. I lost 50 pounds, kept it off for better part of 2.5 years. You can as well. MyPhDweightloss.com, 864-644-1900. Now let's get back to what just happened over on MSNBC. On the Morning Joe program, they may have casually referred 5, 6, 1,000 times in this election cycle to Donald Trump being the modern day incarnate of Adolf Hitler. Everybody around him were the Nazi brown shirts. Everything was fascist, fascist, fascist. Well, guess where Joe and Mika were over the weekend? Why? They went to Mar-a-Lago. They went to Hitler's bunker. Let's play that cut.
Over the past week, Joe and I have heard from so many people from political leaders to regular citizens, deeply dismayed by several of President-elect Trump's cabinet selections, and they are scared. Last Thursday, we expressed our own concerns on this broadcast and even said we would appreciate the opportunity to speak with the president-elect himself. On Friday, we were given the opportunity to do just that. Joe and I went to Mar-a-Lago to meet personally with President-elect Trump. It was the first time we have seen him in 7 years.
Now, we talked about a lot of issues, including abortion, mass deportation, threats of political retribution against political opponents, and media outlets. We talked about that a good bit. And it's going to come as no surprise to anybody who watches this show, has watched it over the past year or over the past decade, that we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of issues, and we told him so.
What we did agree on was to restart communications. My father...
Wait. They're having communications with Hitler? Did they tell their fan base on MSNBC that they're now in open negotiations with Hitler? They're pacifying Hitler? Let's get back to the mainstream media and whether or not they have learned how to read the room, as it were, after the election. I'm maintaining they're not quite there yet. Over the weekend on the Sunday shows, if you look at the cabinet picks and senior appointments that Donald Trump has made thus far, and there's easily a couple of dozen plus, there's very little to complain about unless it's just on pure partisan grounds, right? Just Trump made them and they're Republicans, so therefore we have to object to them. But in their heart of hearts, they don't have a lot of complaints about him. I mean, they really honestly don't. There's a handful they do, and we all know the ones they're going to complain about. And I've got questions about some of them as well. We were never going to expect perfection out of Donald Trump's appointees. That said, there are voices out there amongst the left that are available and have some credibility to be able to challenge some of these selections and critique and criticize some of these selections. But the voices that mainstream media, regime media tended to pick over the weekend were voices that just made me laugh. Let's take the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at HHS. And I've got my issues with Kennedy at HHS. He is a staunch abortion supporter all the way up to the point of delivery. I don't like that much. And normally that wouldn't matter in most cabinet positions. But at Health and Human Services, that actually does have some impact on policy. That is something I'm concerned about. He's got a lot of upside potential if he cleans out the agency and gets rid of a lot of the bureaucrats that were responsible for the pseudoscience dressed up as policy during the COVID lockdown. I think that would just be terrific. But there is a legitimate question set to pose to RFK Jr. as Health and Human Services Secretary. But what does mainstream media do? They bring on Kathleen Sebelius. Cut number 2.
Your thoughts on RFK Jr.'s nomination and how dangerous would he be as Secretary of Health and Human Services?
Well, I just listened to Congressman Ivey, and I think that we're talking about magnitudes of danger beyond erroneously making legal decisions. This is life or death.
Okay, let's stop. Kathleen Sebelius is the architect and implementer of Obamacare, which hijacked 1/6 of the American economy back in 2011 and federalized and issued mandates about what coverage you could and could not have. So for her to say what's dangerous about this pick, I'm sorry, we saw what dangerous was in Obamacare, and we still haven't recovered from it. I mean, for crying out loud, there's a story in the Washington Post over the weekend. Millions may not have health coverage if the subsidies, meaning the taxpayer dollars that are being shoveled by the brick to subsidize and keep Obamacare afloat return to pre-Biden levels. So if we don't keep shoveling cash down the sinkhole that is Obamacare to keep it propped up, why people might not have the health coverage that they think they have. I thought Obamacare was going to be self-sustaining and that was going to bend the curve, according to Kathleen Sebelius, and lower health care costs. And it was going to increase coverage, increase options. You could keep your doctor if you wanted to keep your doctor, if you liked it. If you liked your plan, you could keep your plan. Of course, none of that was true. They took a keg of dynamite to the healthcare system and how it functions, and it's been kind of disjointed and dysfunctional ever since. And she thinks that RFK would be dangerous? Maybe she might want to sit this one out. There are voices to challenge. She's not one of them. Or let's take another example. Tulsi Gabbard is another pick for the ODNI, Office of the Directorate of National Intelligence. And there's lots of questions that people have on both sides of the ideological aisle about whether or not she would be a good fit there and whether she's migrated on her views towards Bashar al-Assad, among others, or what she thinks about Russia. There's questions that I want to hear as a conservative. But is that who mainstream media brings on to pose those questions? Why, no. Jen Psaki over on MSNBC brought on this guy, John Brennan, cut number 3.
So let me just start with Tulsi Gabbard, because you served as the CIA director for 4 years. What would having her in charge or in the role of director of national intelligence mean for the intelligence apparatus of the U.S. government?
I think there's so much uncertainty about what Ms. Gabbard would bring to the job. As you pointed out, she has been an apologist for Vladimir Putin, Bashar al-Assad. So many of her substantive comments, as well as previous actions, have called into question whether or not she has a good understanding of global politics and the U.S. role there. But also, she doesn't have any experience in intelligence. She has never served in the intelligence community. And the Director of National Intelligence is somebody who sits on top of the 18 departments and agencies and needs to orchestrate these agencies so that they collaborate, so that they coordinate, so that they're able to
Okay, let's stop there. I don't care if she doesn't have experience with intel. She needs to blow a lot of those people out, like John Brennan and his colleagues, because do I need to remind you that John Brennan is the Nosferatu of American politics? This guy is the most nefarious and insidious character in American government since the Nixon administration. Maybe before that. He's the guy that helped orchestrate the Steele dossier, the Russia hoax, all of it which was made up out of whole cloth with the specific intent to subvert and sabotage the incoming Trump administration. He's as evil of an American character in politics and intelligence as we've ever had. Now, again, are there voices that could object and challenge Tulsi Gabbard? Sure. Is he one of those voices? Absolutely not. But that's the default that regime media is still going to because they can't read the room. Let me give you another example. The Matt Gaetz nomination for Attorney General. Lots of people have a big problem with that. As Scott Jennings over on CNN said, of all the nominees the president has made thus far, Matt Gaetz probably starts below the bar of being able to be confirmed. He's got to play his way in. He's got to talk his way into being confirmed. Everybody else is above the bar, but they could lose it depending on how they perform in their hearings. Gaetz probably is a fail before his hearing, and he's got to do something spectacular to play his way in. But if you're going to find somebody out there that's a voice to talk about Matt Gaetz, this is who CNN brought in. Adam Schiff, newly minted California senator, cut number 4.
You heard what Speaker Johnson said about Matt Gaetz. What do you think?
I think he's not only unqualified, he is really disqualified. Are we really going to have an attorney general who there's credible allegations he was involved in child sex trafficking, potential illicit drug use, obstruction of investigation, who has no experience serving in the Justice Department, only being investigated by it? But Jake, I think the whole point with these nominees, several of them, is their unqualification, is their affirmative
Okay, let's stop.
disqualification.
Let's stop. Here's the thing about Adam Schiff. CNN had an opportunity. There are 6 new voices in the Senate GOP conference. It was a net pickup of 4 seats, right? Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, Bernie Moreno in Ohio, Tim Sheehy in Montana, and who was the fourth? Jim Justice in West Virginia, right? Those were the 4 fresh new faces coming into the party. But there was actually 2 more that replaced retiring Republicans. Jim Banks in Indiana, who's going to be a spectacular senator from the Hoosier State, and John Curtis, who replaces Mitt Romney in Utah. So there's 6 new voices that are on the majority side of the Senate incoming. Does Jake Tapper and CNN talk to any one of those 6? No. They talk to the two of the Democrat new faces, Adam Schiff and Ruben Gallego of Arizona. Because apparently sitting on the back bench and being in the minority and not being able to do a darn thing about nominees, thanks to the late Harry Reid blowing up the appointment filibuster, CNN didn't even have any qualms about talking to only the left side. They didn't really want to hear from Republican senators, apparently. But they bring in Adam Schiff. Now, John Campbell is a good friend of mine, used to be the congressman of this studio where I'm broadcasting from. He was my congressman. He was a weekly guest on Hugh Hewitt's show back when he was a state assemblyman, state senator, and then for his 8 years plus in the United States House of Representatives. Good guy. Was on the Financial Services Committee, knew all the good and bad people on both sides of the aisle. He used to say that the most liberal member of Congress was Barney Frank of Massachusetts. But Barney Frank, you knew where you stood. If he told you something, he'd keep his word. You might not agree with his politics, but personally, he kept his word. Campbell said that there was no bigger serial liar in the Congress than Adam Schiff. And he's going to say that Matt Gaetz is a bad guy? Sorry, have a seat. Look, it's a couple-minute long clip, but I've got to play it for you because it's too grand. I've been asking the rhetorical question this morning about whether regime media and voices on the left have started to figure out how to read the room, as it were. And I don't think they're there yet. And case in point, and one that will raise eyebrows with you, is Jen Psaki over on MSNBC. This is from her program last night, cut number 14.
There's obviously a lot of soul searching right now going on within the Democratic Party, and that's a good thing. But what I worry about is that in the course of all that soul searching, some Democrats might reach the wrong sweeping conclusions. And there are a lot of issues that fall into that bucket. But one in particular that stuck out to me is transgender rights. Republicans spent hundreds of millions of dollars on anti-trans ads this election cycle, including one that showed Vice President Harris talking about government funding for gender-reaffirming care for prisoners and detainees. If that sounds like a particularly obscure issue, it is, because it applies to a tiny group of people. And it's also a policy that, by the way, was in place during the first Trump presidency. Another one of the lines that ran over and over again in those ads and throughout right-wing media is this idea that America is faced with a crisis of boys playing in girls' sports. Now, these ads created this perception that the issues of trans kids playing sports was dominating schools across the country, which is completely false. Some people got pulled into that argument. I mean, immediately after the election, Congressman Seth Moulton told the New York Times that, quote, Democrats spend way too much time trying not to offend anyone rather than being brutally honest about the challenges many Americans face. I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. And then last weekend, Congressman Moulton came on this network to discuss those comments.
I was just speaking authentically as a dad about one of many issues where I think we're just out of touch with the majority of voters. And I stand by my position. You know, maybe I didn't get all the words exactly right. But the point is that the backlash I've received proves my point that we can't even have these discussions as a party.
Look, reflection is good. But if that were actually an issue at thousands of schools across the country, it would be worthy of a debate. But there are just incredibly few examples of transgender girls playing in youth sports. And when we see those examples, there isn't evidence that these kids are a threat to safety or fairness.
So, Bethany Mandel, you've got Jen Psaki saying, oh, it's only a handful of boys playing in girls' sports. You've got John Fetterman over the weekend saying, it's only 115 votes or illegal votes are counting in Butler. What's the big deal? You had Martha Raddatz tell J.D. Vance famously in the election cycle that it's only a handful of apartment complexes that have been taken over by illegal gang members. Bethany, they haven't learned their lesson, have they?
No. One of my favorite examples of Democrats doing this is when they talk about late-term abortion. They're like, there's only a few hundred, maybe a few thousand late-term abortions every year. Why do Republicans care so much? Well, I mean, I care about a single baby being butchered, but when there's hundreds or thousands, I care exponentially more. But perhaps we should not wait until a ball is spiked during a volleyball game by a boy into a girl's face and she's internally decapitated before we start caring about this issue. Because on transgender issues, we have seen an exponential rise in the number of youth that are considering themselves to be transgender. Even Brianna Wu, who is transgender, him or herself, says that this is an exponential rise and that there's a contagion going on here, a social contagion. So I'm not sure what is the benchmark, how many apartment buildings need to be taken over in Colorado, how many
what's the acceptable number, right?
Competing before I'm allowed to care.
Exactly. What's the acceptable number? It's like Kathy Hochul. What's the acceptable number of a new tax before I can call it a discount? I was going to charge you 15, but now I'm only going to charge you 9. I'm saving you 40%.
Yeah.
Bethany, it's just crazy what the left is doing.
It reminds me of what the New York Times did with RFK this weekend. Did you see their column about RFK trying to fact check him?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead and tell people quickly.
Yes. So they said, Kennedy, they were trying to fact check him and they said, Kennedy has claimed that Froot Loops has too many artificial ingredients, questioning why the Canadian version has fewer than the US version. But he was wrong. The ingredient list is roughly the same, although Canada's natural coloring is made from blueberries and carrots, while the US product contains red dye 5, yellow 5, blue 1, as well as a lab-made chemical that is used for freshness, according to the ingredient label. So that's the New York Times fact-checking RFK.
The late Rush Limbaugh used to say that when the left is out of power, that's when they get fun, because they get crazy. I am joined by an old and dear friend of 20-plus years. Since we started doing this show, I think we began having conversations with Jim Garrity over at National Review, who is now the senior political correspondent there. Jim has all sorts of great novels that he's offered that we have never seen one of here. He is the host of the Morning Jolt, and he's just a good friend. And Jim, I get to host it. I know.
Stack them up. There you go. So everyone can see them for the visual show. I realize it's not as much fun on the radio, holding up the titles of your books and showing the covers and all that stuff. So
yes, and I would show you my personal library that has a hole for the Jim Garrity selection that has not yet arrived, but that would be a waste of precious.
Dwayne, I'll send the books to you, but not to Hugh. How does that sound? How does that work?
That sounds like a good plan, actually. That would be kind of fun, actually, to do that. So my days is going great, right? I get to fill into the big chair and host the show. So it's always a special day for me. And then I get the glorious news that mid-show that Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski announced on MSNBC this morning that they visited Hitler's bunker at Mar-a-Lago. And then, as if the day couldn't get any better, I see this tweet from Crystal Ball, their former colleague on MSNBC, who writes this just a few minutes ago. More than any other media hosts, these two, meaning Joe and Mika, are responsible for the Dem Party's disastrous obsession with Liz Cheney never-Trumpers over the working class and the destruction of the class-first Bernie movement. Now that they've helped usher the fascists in, they go and kiss the ring. Disgusting. Jim Garrity, it's when you've gaslit people that much, that hot for that long, when you turn the flame off, it's gonna mess people up for a while, isn't it?
So Dwayne, I just want to, to make sure I'm understanding. So these are the people who were crying on air, weren't they?
Yes, because women were dying. We're going to die because of this.
So I want to point out, way back in 2016, really 2015, in the run-up to the primaries, Joe and Mika had Trump on there. And remember, nothing too hard, Mika? Right? That this, he got softball interviews on Morning Joe back in 2015. They loved him.
Because they didn't think he had a prayer.
Yeah. Back when he was going to be the easiest, person for Hillary to defeat. And of course, he was this ratings magnet. Every time Trump was on a morning show, you knew he was going to say something crazy, and it was going to, people tuned in just to see what Trump was going to say. And then they turned into leaders of the resistance, and they were, adamantly, MSNBC was indistinguishable from the, internal programming of the Democratic National Committee. And now they went to Mar-a-Lago. But remember when Trump tweeted, like she had said something critical, and he talked about her plastic surgery. It was this weird, nasty, ludicrously and I remember thinking at the time, I know the Hugh Hewitt listenership doesn't like the fact that I'm never Trump. But I'm going to point out that, like, when you're president of the United States, you really shouldn't lose any sleep over what Mika Brzezinski is saying about you. You really shouldn't care that much. You should just go out and do your job. Let the chips fall where they may. Do what you think is right, and just accept the fact that a bunch of days Mika Brzezinski is going to be really upset with you. And instead, this clearly got under Trump's skin. Now you're going to hear, oh, Trump doesn't care what the media thinks. Why is he inviting Joe and Mika to Mar-a-Lago then? Clearly he cares about what these people think. Clearly he's still obsessed with what gets said about him on television.
Well, you can make that claim, and I'm sure there's probably something to that. But don't you think there was probably an enjoyment factor from Donald Trump to have them have to come to him and grovel?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those things where, as much as, like, for all their arguments that you made the reference to Hitler's bunker, that he's the autocrat, the authoritarian, he's going to end American democracy. Sure, we'll come down and hang out at Mar-a-Lago. Sounds fun, it was. Remember, these people were furious with Jimmy Fallon for having him on his show in like fall of 2016 and messing with the hair and the previous year Trump had hosted Saturday Night Live, and there was kind of this question of like, if Trump is the real, David Duke, if Trump is this, irredeemable villain in public life, why does NBC keep inviting him on their shows? Why is he celebrated as, of course he worked on NBC for a whole bunch of years. So there's this contradiction there. Now, I can understand any journalist saying, anytime you get a chance to talk to Donald Trump, he will generate news. There's an argument to be said that simply for news value, if you get a chance. But as you're describing it, Dwayne, this wasn't an on-camera interview. This is just hanging out at Mar-a-Lago, right?
Yeah. They put out feelers to see if he would entertain, because they want to have some access to the next administration over the next 4 years, because NBC otherwise is going to be locked out, right? They're going to have no access at all to this administration. And so Joe and Mika were at least trying to play, 1.5D chess and say, could you at least entertain us and we can maybe talk things out and maybe open up lines of communication again? And Trump's like, sure, come on down.
That is really fascinating. The crystal ball assessment there, and we should emphasize, former MSNBC host Crystal Ball, not the gypsy woman thing there. I don't believe that Bernie Sanders first of all, like the entire messaging of the Harris campaign was, I'm fighting for the middle class. I'm fighting on behalf of you, right? There's this whole the argument, whenever Democrats lose a race, the argument from the progressive faction is, you didn't go progressive enough. You didn't do what we want enough. Never mind the fact that she fairly was. And it's very interesting to watch Liz Cheney turn into the favorite scapegoat. I don't think Liz Cheney added a lot of votes to the Harris, pile. I also don't think she detracted anybody or sent and drove anybody away from the Harris pile.
I think she was totally irrelevant.
Yeah, our mutual friend Mary Catherine Ham, I think, and I think I'm attributing this correctly, pointed out that like, look, the Nikki Haley, never Trump, suburban hawkish, that's a more white collar crowd than the
Right.
blue collar crowd, and whether the Harris campaign and Democrats are more comfortable talking to conservative white collar never Trump voters than they are voting to blue collar voters, even if they're more democratic leaning. That, in other words, like the class sensibilities are such a strong factor there that they couldn't do a John Fetterman style campaign, that they don't want to talk to guys who look like John Fetterman. It's a
Right.
fascinating kind of argument there. I also kind of think there's the New York Times has this great column that I'm going to be writing about later today, pointing out that like we've been saying that, oh, how do you spend $1 billion and lose? Well, you add up everything, it's probably closer to 2 billion, going back to when Biden had the
It's an
Biden campaign. Like the
astounding sum
entirety,
of cash.
yeah,
Yes.
right? And people are saying, like, like on the one hand, that's a really bad reflection on Kamala Harris. On the other point, though, it does indicate that like there was no one decision that would have reversed this election. That there was no, oh, if they'd spent more here, or if she'd spent more time in Wisconsin, or something like that. She was not one area. The Walls pick was bad, but I thought Shapiro would have been a better pick. But I don't think Shapiro. Maybe he flips Pennsylvania. I don't think he flips all 7, swing states, or
Yeah.
even the 3 swing states. So, like,
Yeah,
the
I
interesting thing
think.
is, like, you have financial advantage, and arguably none of it mattered. That
Yeah,
by
I
the
think
time
if you've
information
got
was
right track,
fully Democratic.
right track, wrong track, the way it was almost an impossible landscape for any incumbent. And Kamala Harris is an incumbent, so she was fighting an uphill battle all the way. Just closing question, because we're almost out of time. You, as you mentioned up front, you are part of the Never Trump world, and I understand that. Take that into account. But of the 25 picks that the president has made thus far, we can certainly focus on the 3 or 4 that we are all going to focus on because we don't like those picks. But if you take the sum of all of the picks that he's made thus far, better than expected, about what you expected, or worse than you expected, Jim Garrity?
Oh, until those 3 or 4, it was considerably better than expected. If you told me you were going to get Marco Rubio as Secretary of State,
right,
I would have rested a lot easier. And I know a few folks who are on the more, I don't know, you want to say dovish or isolationist or non-hawkish wing of the GOP, who saw that and were like, wait, this is a Nikki Haley pick. What are we talking about? Why did we elect Trump? Now we've got some other people in there who are a little more along that dovish or isolationist line.
Be had. Looking during the break, Washington Post story by Sabrina Rodriguez. Ruben Gallego has a blueprint to win Latino men. Will Democrats listen? Well, I actually don't need to read the entire story to see what Ruben Gallego's blueprint is. I know what his blueprint is. His blueprint to all prospective Democratic Senate candidates is to pick a Republican to run against that doesn't have a chance of winning. That's pretty much what his winning formula was. There was some really good stuff on the weekend shows that were actually substantive that I want to make sure you at least have a chance to hear, instead of just the pablum and copium that was going on the traditional Sunday shows on the big 3 networks and CNN. And this is by our friend Mike Gallagher, former Wisconsin congressman and now that the American elections has happened and where we may go with our defense secretary and who may get confirmed and who may not get confirmed. And here was what Mike Gallagher offered as advice to the Senate and to the incoming administration on how to think about China. Cut number 17.
Thank you for your service to our country. First of all, you're not prone to hyperbole. 2 years, what makes you think the window is closing that quickly?
Well, 2027 is the date that Chairman Xi Jinping has set, or rather General Secretary Xi Jinping has set for his military to be ready to invade Taiwan by force if necessary. Who knows if he'll actually launch it on that day? That happens to coincide with the 100th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army founding. But we are in the window of maximum danger. The conventional balance of military hard power continues to deteriorate. Our Navy is getting smaller at the same time that China has built the biggest Navy in the world. And so we have to operate under the assumption that Xi Jinping is serious. If we've learned anything from the war in Ukraine, it's that when a dictator tells you they want to do something, even if it seems outlandish from a Western or an American perspective, you have to take that threat seriously, because in societies like theirs, a Marxist-Leninist-led society, they're willing to endure far more pain, and they would be willing to throw lives at this problem. And so we need to be moving heaven and earth. Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense needs to move heaven and earth to put hard power in Xi Jinping's path before it's too late. The only way to preserve peace, to prevent a war, is to put the Pentagon on a war footing and fire anybody that gets in his way.
All right, there is a nominee for SecDef. You also have John Lee Ratcliffe, Mike Walsh, Marco Rubio. You were a very well-respected voice on national security matters when you were in the House. What advice would you give them on what to do and in what order in which to do it?
The most important thing is to prioritize hard power. For our diplomatic efforts to have life, to have strength, they need to be backed by the credible threat of military force. As a great Wisconsinite, George Kennan, once said, you have no idea how much it contributes to the general politeness and pleasantness of diplomacy to have a nice, quiet little armed force in the background. The second thing is to prioritize the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party and understand that it's not just an over-there threat, it's a right here at home threat. It connects to the lack of security on our southern border because fentanyl, of course, the precursors in which are supplied by the Chinese Communist Party, are going across the southern border and killing tens of thousands of Americans. The third and final thing I would advise them, and unlike the old Cold War, we really are in an era where the private sector needs to work more constructively with the government. Most of our innovation when it comes to cutting-edge technology is happening not in a government lab somewhere, but in the private sector. So we need to make sure that the best and brightest in Silicon Valley, in the tech sector more broadly, aren't spending their time and energy on optimizing algorithms for cat videos on a social media app, but are applying those talents to hard national security challenges, bridging the gap between the technology and private sector more broadly and the national security community is the imperative that the next administration must run with in order to be successful against China.
All right, Chairman, during COVID, we swore that we would reduce our...
So he's absolutely right. I mean, Mike Gallagher, when he speaks, a lot of people in D.C. in the national security world listens because he's got a lot of experience and a lot of insight on where we think Xi Jinping is going to go. It still wouldn't have surprised me to see Mike Gallagher in the administration somewhere, but for now he is a very important voice at Palantir and appearing on media pretty much whenever he wants to. Let's contrast that. They mentioned the nomination of Pete Hegseth, which I think is probably going to be a successful nomination. I think he will be confirmed to be secretary. I'm growing to love his pick more and more. The more I research and the more I read from his War on Warriors book and listen to his media appearances about what his view is on where we need to focus our attention, both how to project power and we're going to need to project power, as well as the mechanics within the Pentagon, the infrastructure within the Pentagon, and how much that needs to be jostled around. And people that are more worried about woke stuff need to go, and people that are worried about killing people and breaking things, that's what the Pentagon needs to get back to doing. So you compare what Mike Gallagher had to say with CNN's Sunday show, State of the Union with Jake Tapper. They brought on, again, two of the new Democratic voices coming into the Senate who are really not going to have much to do and much to say on much of anything. because of the late Harry Reid scrapping the judicial and administrative filibusters. So a 53-seat majority is going to pretty much have their way with it. But Jake Tapper still thought you needed to hear what new Democratic voices have to say. He brought up the nomination of Hegseth with Ruben Gallego of Arizona, and this is what he said. Cut 5.
Well, I'm going to give him an opportunity to, number one, explain himself, and I'll give that to all these cabinet members. You know, the most important things that I'm going to use for all the metrics of everybody that's running is, number one, are you going to protect and serve the Constitution of the United States? Number two, is this going to be beneficial to Arizona? And are you, where relevant, going to help us bring down the cost of everything that's in Arizona and the country in general? So, I'm not going to jump ahead and say yes or no. I'll give him his opportunity as part of my constitutional duties, but I think he has to answer for a lot of what he has said in the past.
It's funny that Senator-elect Gallego talks about where relevant. He's really not going to be relevant to this nomination fight. He just isn't. I'm not even sure what committees he's going to be on because the committee makeups are going to flip. The Democrats are going to lose 2 seats on defense or armed services. So I'm not sure if he's even going to have a seat at the table or not. He might, but we don't know that for certain yet. But when he says that he's going to give him a chance and he's going to keep an open mind, look, I'm going to keep an open mind too. And the one that seems to be starting to keep an open mind now is somebody that I didn't expect to, and that's Jon Stewart, the Daily Show guy. Now, he's a Democrat, he's a progressive, he's a lefty, but he has shown little flashes since the election, and even in this clip from last year, he has shown at least a possibility of being open to red pilling a little bit, going back to the Matrix reference. He was talking on a C-SPAN panel with the current Deputy Secretary of Defense. This would be Catherine Hicks. Now, if you don't know who Catherine Hicks is, when Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin had his health issues and just kind of disappeared from public view for however it was, a week or 10 days, didn't even tell the White House that he was taking a medical leave of absence. Catherine Hicks took over the Pentagon, and she was the acting Deputy Secretary or acting Secretary of Defense. So she's kind of an important number 2 at that bureau. And listen to her just snidely, condescendingly sneer away any thought of accountability for the budget and audits and things like that. Here is that exchange with Jon Stewart, cut number 12.
To be doing, there is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse within a system.
Audits and waste, fraud, and abuse are not the same thing. So let's decompose these pieces.
Please educate me on
Sure.
What
so an audit is
difference.
Exactly what you just described,
Yes.
which is, do I know what was delivered to which place?
Right.
The ability to pass an audit or the fact that the DOD has not passed an audit is not suggestive of waste, fraud, and abuse. That is completely false right there. So
what is
now
it
is a question of it's suggestive that we don't have an accurate inventory that we can pull up of what we have where. That is not the same as saying we can't do that because waste, fraud, and abuse has occurred.
So in my world,
yeah,
that's waste.
How is that waste?
If I give you $1 billion and you can't tell me what happened to it, that to me is wasteful. That means you are not responsible. But if you can't tell me where it went, then what am I supposed to think? And when there has been reporting, I mean, this is not, look, I'm not saying this is on you and that you caused this, but I think it's a tough argument to
I'm pretty
make
sure
that
I didn't cause it.
an $850 billion budget to an organization that can't pass an audit and tell you where that money went. I think most people would consider that somewhere in the realm of waste, fraud, or abuse because they would
look at Jon Stewart's face. He's like, I cannot believe she is defending this. Look, I don't know how the hearings will go for Pete Hegseth. I'm pretty confident in his abilities. If Pete Hegseth can demonstrate he is the opposite of Catherine Hicks, he's a shoo-in. Let's get back to the Sunday shows. And I've been giving media kind of a hard time on and off all day, and deservedly so. But when we look at the State of the Union program that Jake Tapper put together on CNN, he at least brought on a token conservative, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Now, that's a fairly important guy to have on. He's, second in line of succession. He's going to have a very slim majority. There's lots of questions to ask him, like how are you going to manage a slim majority again? Are you going to be able to keep everybody in line? Does the exit of Matt Gaetz impact your leadership abilities and trying to keep the Knucklehead Caucus in line? There's lots of things that Jake could ask him. What does Jake spend at least 3 minutes on? Why Trump's cabinet picks, cut number 15.
So beyond the question of whether or not Congressman Gaetz broke the law, and certainly there's a presumption of innocence for anyone, a lot of House Republicans, your colleagues, the people you lead, have real issues with Matt Gaetz as somebody to lead the U.S. Justice Department. I'm sure you've heard them, because I've heard them. I want you to take a listen to now Senator, former House member, Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma, talking to our Manu Raju months ago about Matt Gaetz.
He was accused of sleeping with an underage girl. And there's a reason why no one in the conference came and defended him, because we had all seen the videos he was showing on the House floor that all of us had walked away of the girls that he had slept with. He'd brag about how he would crush ED medicine and chase it with an energy drink so he could go all night.
So just to take a step back, because you and I have known each other for a long time. You're a man of faith. You're a man of God. You're a man of family. With some of these nominees, Gaetz, Hegseth, RFK Jr., I wonder, does it matter anymore for Republicans to think of leaders as people who are moral in their personal lives? Is that still important to the Republican Party?
Let's stop there. Because Mike Johnson gave a very respectful answer, and he answered it the best way he possibly could. But the question was a dumb question by Jake Tapper. The House of Representatives has no say in how the Senate confirms personnel. That is a Senate role. You heard John Thune, the new Republican incoming majority leader, when he was on Hugh's show, about 10 days ago. He said the Senate does two things. We're in the legislative business, but we're also in the personnel business. It's their constitutional role to provide advice and consent. And even if you wanted to entertain the idea that the House and Senate were going to agree and do a kind of an artificial break to allow the president to do recess appointments, that went out the window the second Donald Trump nominated Matt Gaetz. The Senate Republican Conference is not going to go along with a recess appointment because they're not really too keen on the Gaetz pick. He still may end up getting confirmed, but there's still a long way to go there. And the Senate Republicans do not see, and this is broad spectrum from Ted Cruz on one side to Mitch McConnell on the other end. I mean, there's a wide variance in ideological makeup of Senate Republicans as to whether or not they should just blindly rubber stamp every nominee. They're really not, especially with this pick. So for Jake Tapper to waste 3 minutes talking to the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, about Donald Trump's cabinet picks is just ridiculous. He's got nothing to say about it. You might as well ask me about who Taylor Swift is wearing as far as her concert stage apparel. She's still a thing, right? I know she backed the wrong horse after for the election, but I think she's still a thing in concert. But I don't have a clue in the world what kind of costume she wears. It would be like asking me about what's appropriate for Taylor Swift to wear. I'm not the right person to ask that question. Mike Johnson's not the right person to ask about a member no longer in his conference, in his caucus, that is up for a position in the other chamber. Mike Johnson doesn't have anything to do with that. Mike Johnson said, yeah, I could be talked into doing a break if the Senate wanted to do that. But that got rendered moot the second Donald Trump nominated Matt Gaetz. So it's not going to happen. So again, media, you would think, would be in the business of trying to figure out, okay, what went wrong? We lost a lot of say-so in the trust of the American people. What can we do different? They did none of that this weekend. Here's what we do know. Our friend Dennis Prager is still recovering from a very serious back injury. One of his guest hosts, Julie Hartman, reported that he's making incremental improvement, and prayers, if you are the praying type, are still solicited. So we encourage you to do that.